HNN is interviewing the social studies.
What inspired you to teach social studies?
Well, I had a number of great teachers growing up in middle and high school who really made the subject interesting for me. So that really kept me interested in social studies throughout high school and college, and made me want to become a teacher.
And I also had some really good teachers, but mainly it's because I'm interested in the subject. So with social studies, you get everything from history to economics, geography, philosophy, psychology. It's all considered part of social studies, and I always found those topics really interesting.
What do you think are some good qualities in a social studies teacher?
I think a social studies teacher has to be naturally curious about the topics they're teaching, and willing to really learn more about those topics, either through reading about them outside of school or through class discussions. I know a lot of times when we talk about things in my classroom, different topics, I end up learning along with the students because they bring their experiences in and some of their expertise in and teach me as they're learning as well. So without that quality, I think at least my classes I don't think wouldn't be nearly as valuable as they are.
I also think if you're going to teach social studies, you have to have, naturally curious is a good one. Also, I think you have to have an interest in a lot of different things because there's so much, and then be able to connect something that's modern back to something historical. So if you can make those connections. So for instance, we do current events, even though I teach early American U.S. history. Because you can make connections between presidential elections today and compare them to presidential elections, for instance, when Andrew Jackson was elected president. And economic things, same thing. You can make connections between modern things and then back in history. So if you can do that, make those connections, I think students will also be able to understand and relate to things better.
How do you meet the needs for all your diverse learners?
One thing I try to do at the beginning of the year is try to learn about my students as much as possible. So I have them write a letter to me at the beginning of the year, talking about in some parts about how they learn best, and so I can hopefully learn that information at the beginning of the year and kind of know that about them as we go through the school year. But I also like to just use different types of activities, things that engage your students, like if they're verbal learners, they can engage them that way. If they're auditory learners, if they like to, verbal and auditory are kind of the same thing. Verbal and auditory, if they like to listen and talk. If they're visual, if they like to watch things. If they're tactile, if they're more hands-on. I try to combine all those types of activities into my class.
I would agree with Mr. Owens, and for example, in one lesson I might show a video clip, have them do a textbook reading, have them look at images all in one single lesson, and they may work with a group or they may do something more individual, so it gives you a bunch of different ways to learn the same topic.
Well, the first thing that you need to do is define what is a diverse learner. So if I'm assuming that every student is different, I have to look at the needs of all of my students because each one learns differently. So I try to incorporate into my lessons multiple ways of meeting their needs. So for instance, if they're a visual learner, I try to create a lot of pictures and a lot of visuals and video clips. If they like to learn best by reading, we have reading excerpts that they have to read and then show their understanding through answering questions. Some students best express what they know verbally, and they love to talk. So it's really important to engage them so that they have a chance to express themselves, so have activities where they can share with each other as well as being able to, speak out in class and to give their opinions and their thoughts, because that's how they show that they are learning. So I think that if I look at every student's having needs, there are different modalities that can help them to learn their best. So I try to make sure I incorporate all the different varieties and styles of learning so that everyone gets their needs met.
Thank you, Mrs. Berry.
You're welcome, Gloria.
Thank you, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Miss Maple.
You're welcome.